Hello everybody and welcome back to RP1. We have a little bit of a longer episode today because we take on two very important milestones and it takes a little bit of adjustment to get us there. And yeah, I hope you enjoy it. If you're not too into the build aspect of this, once we get into that area, I'll put a timestamp on the screen and you can watch just the missions for today's projects. So we have a jet plane in storage, however, it's not going to be good enough for our mission, so we're going to have to build our own today. We are first going to take a look at our administration building and our active programs. Looking at our X-planes, we still have plenty of contracts left to do, and we're almost at our deadline. For suborbital research, however, we have completely completed this program, and we still have some time to go before our funding runs up, so we can either take it now or let that funding continue. And for our orbital program, our early satellites program, we have no contracts done. However, I'm not too worried about that because we are going to once again attempt to solve several contracts in the same point. Our leaders and programs are all set up, so there's nothing we need to do for that. Okay, so now we are going to be getting into the build. First the plane, then the rocket. So the timestamp on the screen now is if you're not interested in that, go ahead and go there, and I'll see you then. We're going to start off with the Mach 1 cockpit, recently acquired, and this will be able to take us to a higher altitude because the cabin is rated for travel safely up to 75 kilometers, I believe. I'm not entirely sure, but it is. We can now go above the 40-kilometer line, which is where we were limited to in the previous cockpit. And this will allow us to actually gain some science, because science in our realism overhaul science does not run below the 40-kilometer line. You can't get anything from it until you reach that, and that includes planes. So until we are able to safely pass above 40 kilometers, no science for us. So it's a big step here, doing the high altitude contract, and we're not going to be flying at 40 kilometers for very long. This is not a jet craft capable of it. This is, as we see here, using an XLR-25. This is going to be a rocket plane. Go ahead and slap that on there. That is the upgraded version of the XLR-11. This was used on the X2 plane, I believe. The information and history is there in the description. If you want to revert back, you can take a look. But this was used for faster flights and higher altitudes, so it is going to be the ideal engine for us theoretically. So we're going to just go ahead and get our fairings kind of adjusted. This is one way to make a body by tucking in two fuel tanks on the inside. You can kind of just balance out the weight and then use the fairing as kind of well, the body of the plane. Alright, going with this kind of beige off-white color to semi-match the cockpit. And now we're going to kind of adjust our fuel to fit accordingly. And I'm kind of just eyeballing these aerodynamics. I don't have one particular plane that I'm designing this after. I'm just kind of going off of what I know has worked in the past for me, and so doing it that way. I don't know why the game kind of set this preset on the procedural wings from a previous game, and I'm not entirely sure how to fix it. I have, restored defaults and done all that, cleared inputs. I've start the game over and whatnot. But for some reason, it would not stop creating this shape for my wings. So, but in the future, if I can get that fixed, then those wings would have been large rectangles and would have formed them ourselves. But as it stands now, regardless of what kind of wing it is, supersonic, all moving, or fixed, gave us that shape. So now we're stretching it out, and we're putting it towards the back. We're not making it a very wide wing because we don't need it to fly very much. It just needs to pitch up and then pitch down, and then be able to make slight turns without ripping the wings off entirely. So we are creating our flaps and adjusting them to be relatively even. One will be controlling the roll, and I believe both will be controlling the pitch. Because pitch is very important here, because we need to go up vertically very quickly, and when we come down we need to be able to cancel out our falling momentum and turn that into landing momentum. Creating a little wing cap on the end to keep our aerodynamics, and put this little point. Not entirely sure. I believe in traditional aircraft that was like an antenna thing, but I decided to just include it for looks. Adjusting the wings now to put them into place. We still have a very forward center of mass, and even without a lot of fuel, it still stays behind, or the center of lift still stays behind the center of mass pretty significantly. Okay, and now we are putting the wheels on, and since we are not planning on taking off, this is an air-launched vehicle, we don't have to worry about having the wheels close to the center of mass. That does help for taking off, because you want a nice fulcrum for your pitching angle. However, when it comes to landing, it doesn't really matter as long as they are a wide enough base. That'll be good. So I go ahead and take a look at the FAR data, and at first glance this looks great, but each one of these numbers need to be in the negative, so it is actually the opposite of great. However, I'm not entirely sure enough how to fix that, but I really want to test my plane. So now I keep getting this error with this cockpit. I'm not entirely sure how to fix it. If you know, please let me know in the comments. I would love to get that information, but regardless of how little electric charge I gave it, and if I gave it a probe core and had that take care of the battery, none of that seemed to work. It always gave me this warning whenever I tried to launch it or simulate it that it had an excessive amount of battery. Now, one thing I learned in this is that I still need to take advantage of the auto strut when I can, keep all my pieces together. So we're just going to go ahead and do that. If you don't have the auto strut option available, go into your settings in the main menu, and you should, under the general settings, there will be something called advanced tweakables. Go ahead and turn that on, and that will give you a few extra options in a few different areas of the game. So now with the wings, in the test flight, they ended up ripping off. It seemed to me that they were attached to the fairing, so I decided to scoot them up, attach them to the cockpit, and then use the move tool to bring them into place. Now with this, I wasn't too happy with the engine's performance, and seeing that it didn't have any upgrades available, I decided to switch it out for the XLR11, which is what we used previously, but just use one of its more advanced configurations instead. So now we just need to adjust the amount of fuel we have. As we see here, our center of mass comes back fairly dramatically, so the difference in engine makes a lot of difference. So now we are also going to add some air brakes onto this to help us slow down for landing, but we still don't include any parachutes. Don't ask me why. So that was a pretty good test, actually. We're going to need just a little bit more fuel to reach our intended goal. We stopped just short of the 40-kilometer mark, so just adding a little bit of extra burn to it. We didn't want to add too much because then, of course, that makes us heavier. But it's all about finding the right balance. And then we, of course, need to adjust our landing gear. Technically, we could have left it floating. I don't think it matters. Oh, you know what? It might matter with FAR. Nonetheless, we want to make sure our landing gear are attached. So now it comes time for the vanity aspect, painting all the different pieces, so that signifies that the last test flight that we did was a successful one, and I'm feeling fairly confident that this plane will be able to satisfy at least the goal of reaching high altitude. Painting is also kind of nice to make some last minute adjustments to certain pieces of the procedural parts, because you can really see a lot better where certain parts line up. So by adding that orange, gave me an idea of what to adjust on the little end caps of the wing. This is going to be my first attempt at using all moving wings on the for the tail fins, so I'm very interested in seeing how they perform under pressure. And time to throw a little nameplate on the wing. It's just the XP2. Just trying to keep everything nice and simple, short and sweet. That, of course, stands for X-plane, which that, of course, stands for experimental. So we make sure our gears are aligned. We're going to put our front gear slightly above our rear gears, and that will help us land. So now, unfortunately, we're going to have to cancel the hypersonic and the stratospheric research contracts for now, because those require a different type of plane. Of course, Gene Kerman is not too thrilled about that. However, we're going to go ahead and take a look at our early satellite program, and that is going to be something else that we're going to be working on in the next bit. And for that, we need to take a look at what kind of parameters we need, and the most important one is we need a periapsis of 300 kilometers. And on another one, we can have an apoapsis no greater than 15,000, one of those. But these are the parameters that we need to go in between if we want to achieve all of these at once. So we're going to go ahead and just take one of those contracts, so that allows us to keep an eye on our progress. But now we are going to make our first orbital capable rocket. So I start off very simply. This is kind of how you'll end up finding most orbital capable rockets. Any kind of tutorial goes along. We'll probably end up placing a science core on top, followed by a fuel tank, procedural or otherwise, and an aerobee engine for the propulsion. However, that's not the final design today. I actually go through several iterations, and I end up finding a rocket that is more than capable of reaching orbit. It's almost too easy to get to orbit. So we have to figure out the best way to utilize the engines and the tech that we have, and we come up with something pretty interesting, I think. So we're going to just throw a decoupler on the top stage, the science core. Just no real reason, just for simplicity of having a smaller piece instead of this kind of rocket orbiting in space. Go ahead and throw one of these solid rocket boosters on underneath. I like the long burn time that it has, and it helps push the final last bits of our orbit as well as make sure our aerobee is properly pushed forward enough that we don't have any ullage issues. Then I added the avionics core that will be powering the lower lifting stage, and we are going to be using the RD108 as our main engine. So we're going to go ahead and grab one of these modular tanks because I like that it has a designated mount for the type of engine we use. So we can just adjust the size, the width to match the holes in the engine so it fits nice and perfectly. So that dictates the width that we are going to be using. And let's make sure to grab the most advanced engine we can. And given the fact that we are already studying 1958 orbital rocketry, we're going to use the engine configuration from that node, because by the time this rocket is ready and available to be built, that science node will be available to us. So we want to test a rocket with that technology in mind. So now it's just a matter of making it long enough to last its burn time, because this configuration of the RD108 has a 300 some odd second burn time. So this is going to end up being a very large rocket. This is not a typical get to orbit on bare bones, V2 type of thing, but it will work and it will push us forward. And I believe that this engine has enough upgrade configurations, and I believe that it's going to be a workhorse of our agency. So very excited to test this out. The science core shape leaves a little bit to be desired, so I went ahead and made it a little bit smaller, and it does not need to hold that much electricity. I don't know if you saw, but we have way too much electricity. I need to make sure that it can carry enough weight, so I keep changing that. That's when I get the check the EC amount, and that's when I notice how much electrical charge we have put in there. And that dramatically lowers the shape of the avionics core, so that makes things a little bit nicer. I mean, we could have flown with that very elongated cone, but didn't look good. Okay, there we are. We getting, once again, everything, trying to make sure that we don't lose control of anything, and go ahead and do our first simulation. It did not have the thrust to weight that I was looking for, and so now I am looking for some solid rocket boosters to give it a little extra at takeoff. However, we just don't have the tech. We did not put enough into solid rocket boosters. We're not currently researching the node that will give us access to the casters, and then truthfully the casters are what we need for this, because it'll give us the thrust to weight without adding too much extra weight. However, that is not going to be the case, so we decided to go for some liquid fuel engines, and we are going to choose the RD107s since they fit nicely with the RD108. However, these engines are slightly different in the fact that they are semi-asymmetrical in their design. They have these two little nozzles that stick off on the end, but the modular tank itself also has mounts dedicated for the RD107, so it makes things nice and easy to fit in, and makes it look nice, I think. Now I'm just choosing a different nose because I want to make sure that everything's aerodynamic. And once again, I'm also going to be choosing the most advanced tech available to us, and that is the tech that we have yet to research. So as you see here, our delta V is almost 13,000 meters per second, and I believe you need somewhere along the lines of 10,500 meters per second to get to orbit. So this is what I meant about this thing being a beast and almost too capable. And we didn't even extend our side boosters to include the amount of fuel that we needed, so now we have about 14,000, excuse me. It's a good looking rocket so far, but of course, this is RP1, so we are going to simulate. So I found out, as I said, this rocket is more than capable of getting to orbit. In fact, I had gotten to orbit before I could even launch the Aerobee stage, so let's just go ahead and get rid of that. All we need to do is put this probe core in orbit, so I think we can handle that using our SRBs alone. Let's go ahead and take that off. And now I am going to be trying to utilize this first orbit as best I can, and I think the best way to do that is to put an advanced biological capsule on here, give it enough electricity to survive long enough to do as much science as it possibly can, but most importantly is we need to bring it on home. And so we unlocked these heat shields not too long ago, and that gives us the ability of returning from orbit at least a little more easily, not necessarily all the time. So we're going to have to do a lot of simulations to test this. I was going to put the simulations of all this onto the members only channel, but the length of time this episode had taken was way too much for my computer to handle. It did not want to export all that footage at once. So unfortunately, today's build and the simulations that went along with it are not going to be available. However, in the next episode, once we start working on furthering our orbital efforts, then that will be there. So if that's something you're interested in, go ahead and check out our membership channel. So now comes the time of the era of me trying to figure out the proper way of deorbiting this satellite. Well, I guess it is still a satellite. If it's orbital, it's a satellite, correct? So it's a combination of these two SRBs in one way or another. Potentially one of them, potentially both of them. You'll see me flop back and forth until I eventually land on something that works. And it's going to be a journey here, so let's follow along. I just removed the second SRB, and I had also turned down the amount of fuel that it has, so it's not going to burn for as long. Keep trying to figure out the appropriate amount of battery life to put in it so that it survives several orbits. And I realized I was still underburning the engine that I had, so I could afford to lengthen it a little bit longer. Okay, so now it comes time for the top changes. I decided to once again throw on an extra SRB underneath because I'm playing around with the direction of when I decide to deorbit it. Sometimes I need my engine to be on the backside, so that way when I burn retrograde, it lowers my orbit. But I've been playing around with the idea of maybe changing and burning at my retrograde and just coming in a little more ballistically, just kind of straight up and down. And so now I'm going to change that around and put the SRB facing backwards, because I don't have reaction control on this. I don't have avionics control, so I'm just kind of at the mercy of whatever direction I was facing at the time and whatever kind of spin momentum I have. So I tried to get by with without that bottom SRB, but we did end up needing it to get into orbit, so that is unfortunate. However, our new idea is to put a heat shield on the top as well, because we found out that when we deorbited this satellite, we sometimes flipped the other way around. So we're going to need to make sure that we can keep this protected on all sides if we can, because the re-entry heating is brutal. So now what our goal is we are going to put some fairings on there. Since this isn't the camera experiment, it doesn't need to have direct access to space in order to function. So we can go ahead and tuck this all away inside a fairing and just leave it there until it re-enters the atmosphere safely. So now, looking at our total delta V, we drop down to 10,754. Adding the extra biological experiment, the fairings, the parachute, all that makes a difference in the amount of delta V you had. So I was thinking that this will just push us farther and farther than we needed to, but I realized that once you have a payload of any sort of significant weight, things are going to need more oomph in order to do the same job that they did with less. And so that's one of the reasons why I wanted to pick an engine that had a lot of configuration upgrades, because it is important to try to make it last as long as possible, to be useful for as long as possible, as many missions as possible, because you save money that way since it's already tooled. Sometimes if you can make anything reusable, then you have that to your advantage as well. But so here we are once again loading in. This was on a different recording session. If you ever see me having to load the craft at the beginning or after a simulation, it's typically because I've been recording for way too long by the end of that simulation, and now I have to come back at a different time and keep going. RP1 episodes take considerably longer than other Kerbal episodes. So here is my brief experimentation with using the baby sergeants as my deorbiting burn. And yeah, it's like I mentioned, it's brief. I did manage to get one of these baby sergeants to work at one point, but it was so much by luck, and I was burning Orbital out, so I ended up going, even as I was descending through the atmosphere, I burnt up back out of the atmosphere and came back down, almost straight down, and for some reason it survived, but it wasn't something that I could replicate, and that is a little bit more important at the time. So now I'm just adjusting my probe core. I decided to turn it into a near-Earth avionics core to see if there was any possible way I could kind of maintain a retrograde hold as I came back in through the atmosphere. I will just go ahead and let you know, no, I couldn't. That's not a thing. If it doesn't have any kind of gimbaling or reaction wheel, then there's nothing you can do. And now we're going to adjust the width of our heat shield to try to cover as much surface area as possible, keep everything protected, and then we are going to lower the amount of fuel in our SRB, only to find out that we were at the lowest amount possible. So unfortunately, I would like to come in more gradually, but we can only do so much. So as kind of expected, the near-Earth probe core was not usable, not suitable, and there is no need to not have it be a science core. So let's go ahead and adjust that fairing down once again. And rather than bringing in the fairing lower, I decided to just create the heat shield to be a little bit wider. Once again, throwing on a baby sergeant. I feel like there might be something here. When it comes to RSS, RP1RO, sometimes you just need to play around with things and experiment in ways that you didn't think would work. Use engines that you wouldn't imagine would be capable, and really just kind of push the boundaries of what you think is acceptable with these rockets, unless of course you want to go for a very historical aspect, in which case it's also kind of that. You know, it's the Wild West, it's the frontier of space travel. Sometimes you just need to throw rockets at the wall and see what sticks and what explodes. So we are almost there. We are getting very close. Things are rounding down into acceptable limits and replicatable events. So now I feel comfortable enough naming it, and we go ahead and name it the Daedalus 1. We used the Icarus 1 as our suborbital science program rocket, and now since we are no longer coming back down to the planet, we're no longer falling from the sun, we name it the Daedalus. So if you're unfamiliar with the story of Daedalus, I highly recommend checking that out. So we need a new launch pad, of course, so we're going to go ahead and create that, and then when that's all made, we are going to tool our rocket, utilize better avionics technology that we had unlocked during the time, and make sure we have enough electricity, like electrical charge, because we don't have any solar panels on this, so we just have to pack the batteries that we bring. Give it another final look around, and then make sure our staging is correct, of course. Very important before setting anything up. And now we're going to tool it. We take a $26,000 rocket, turn it into a $6,000, and we realize that this thing is going to be doing quite a bit for us. I think the Daedalus program may be a long-running family of rockets. So let's go ahead and put everything onto the launch pad, or into the queue anyways. And once again, we get the excessive electrical charge warning. But anyways, now it is time to work on the X-Plane missions. Welcome back to anybody who has skipped forward. We are now going to air launch our XP2. We're going to bring it down, or bring it to a distance of about 210 kilometers. That was about what we found in our testing. That seemed to be around the sweet spot. So Amanda Bennett, our current resident pilot, gets in the cockpit, very quickly opens up the autopilot and turns it on. Very important to do because you only have a few seconds before the air launch takes you and puts you into the sky, and then you have to get everything situated and have control. So it's best to get the autopilot turned on as quickly as possible. We also turned on our waypoint manager, so we have an idea of where to land below the clouds. Very, 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 very important in RSS Reborn, because the clouds will make landing at the KSC a significant challenge if you try to land from any sort of height. So the mission for today, once again, or actually if you had skipped the build, then you do not know. The mission for today is to reach high altitude. We have to break the 40-kilometer line and come back down safely. We only have one pilot, so we can't lose her just yet. So this is an X-Plane, rocket powered experimental, and so this is less about coasting up calmly and more about pointing ourselves upwards as if we were a rocket. So we have this kind of high angle of attack, but as long as we don't lose momentum, as long as our surface speed doesn't start coming down, then we should be on track to reach our goal. We're also going to be reaching a couple side milestones, such as the crewed altitude record of 25 kilometers. I believe there's a 35-kilometer one, and then eventually 40. So this is going to be a historic flight, if there ever was one. And the next few X-Plane flights are going to be similarly groundbreaking as we finish up the program itself. And I'm pretty excited about that. We wasted a lot of time in this series. We are, it's 1960, and we haven't even reached orbit yet. So this is definitely not a speedy or efficient playthrough. But I'm pretty happy in the fact that we still are. We haven't failed any programs, and I know it's hard to fail a program, but we haven't passed the deadline on any of our programs, and as long as we can get our stuff together with this X-Plane, then we should keep on track with that. And I'm talking over it, but here we go. We are now passing the apoapsis of 40 kilometers, so now we know that we will achieve that goal. And we're gonna go a little bit higher, so that way we give ourselves some room for air, but our fuel is almost out, and so we're going to just utilize it, push ourselves forward, and extend out our trajectory a little bit more. But yeah, we are at 43 kilometers now, so all we have to do is land safely. We're also getting a little bit of science from that. The crew report is running. It's going to take 4 minutes and 35 seconds to achieve all of its science, and we are definitely not going to be past 40 kilometers for that amount of time. That's going to have to be for a future flight. Taking a look inside the cockpit, this is the Warbirds IVA mod. It's not on CCAN. You're going to have to actually search for that on Google, but all of this is usable. This navigation system, the nav radios and the comms radios, all of that is usable, so you can utilize actual charts and navigational features of I believe RSS. I know you can use the Kerbal navigational charts and use those radio frequencies to travel in IVA mode. I've done some experimentation with it, but I'm nowhere near good enough to utilize it in any of the videos. But I recommend checking that out if that's something you're interested in. So now it comes time to heading back down. We gotta go beneath the clouds and land safely on the runway, or as close to it as possible. We're gonna keep our autopilot on. We are no longer, we didn't use actually the cruise flight director for this. We just used the standard fly-by-wire, but if you did use the cruise director, I would recommend turning it back to fly-by-wire, and that'll give us a little bit more control. I flop out the air brakes a little bit because the speed building up was making me a little nervous. The wings are rated for supersonic travel, but still don't like maneuvering it too quickly. Let me hop again into IVA mode as we descend through the clouds with our engine failure and overspeed warnings. Gorgeous. So as much as I would like to land in IVA mode, in RP1 I feel a little less comfortable than I do in KSP. And for good reason. We just tilted ourselves just a little bit too quickly and our wings ripped off. But I decided, you know what? Let's just save the mission while we can. All we needed to do was land or splash down somewhere. We're close enough to the KSC, and the repairs needed for this plane are basically just to put wings back on it. So I'm pretty happy with the result. So we're gonna go ahead and just time warp our way down. Amanda Bennett feels very safe, descending at about 4 meters per second. So we have no fear in our mind that she will be able to come back to us. So that is the high altitude mission done. The next missions are going to be a little bit more of the same, to go higher, to go do science in that stratosphere. I believe we're gonna have to do jets at some point again too, and jets to me are significantly harder than rocket-based planes, so we'll see that. And we land very realistically on our nose and take a second to fall over. I think that was pretty funny. Well, let's go ahead and bring Amanda Bennett home, welcome her back as a hero, let her retire a little bit later, 95 days later, so that's nice. 1964 is when we will have her till, and hopefully we can utilize her for the rest of the X-Plane program. We get a little bit of science, but not enough to really do anything with. So now it is time to work on the Daedalus. We've got 2 of them in our program, so let's go ahead and get the first one out on the launch pad. On a partly cloudy day, we go ahead and get ready to make history. This is going to be another one of those missions where I leave the majority of the footage unedited, because this is the first time that we've made orbit in this program. First time we've made orbit with this particular type of rocket. First time we made orbit in RSS Reborn, so gonna keep an eye on it as long as possible. There's no need to skip ahead or time warp forward. I get to be in cinematic mode until about 100 meters per second in speed, surface speed, and in my test I found out that was roughly around the cloud layer. Beautiful. But anyways, let's go ahead and open up Smart ASS, and we're going to be adjusting our pitch downwards, and we're going to be doing it in increments of 25 meters per second. So every 25 meters per second of surface speed increase, we're going to drop the pitch 1 degree until we reach about 55 degrees, and then we're just going to kind of push our way through to the 45-degree angle until we reach our desired apoapsis, at which point we are going to point horizontally and burn the rest of this lower stage. I went and brought up the Delta V stabs, orbit information, and Smart ASS to larger sizes to help you see a little bit easier what it is that I'm seeing, the numbers that I'm looking at. And on the Delta V stats, it's the lower number, the 38, 37, 36. That number, that is our side boosters Delta V remaining. And once that hits 0, we're going to stage it. And in the orbital info, the main thing I'm looking at is the apoapsis, which is the second line down, currently at 83, 84, so on. And now I have pitched all the way to 45 degrees. So I'm not going to be dealing with the Smart ASS for a little bit. We have about 6 seconds left in our side booster, so we're getting ready to stage. And there they go. We go ahead and stage it, and then right then we decide to drop it to 0 degrees. So we're pointed directly at the horizon, because our apoapsis passed 140 kilometers. And in our test, that's all we needed to do. We're not going to try to achieve all 4 contracts in the very first orbit. We are going to leave that for a future rocket. But in this very first orbit, all we need to do is pass 140 kilometers apoapsis, which will be our periapsis once we reach orbit. So as long as we're above the Kármán line, will be good. As you saw there, I wiggled down to show that our biological capsule was indeed collecting science. Always good to know. So under the Delta V stats, we got 51 seconds left remaining of our lower stage. At about 10 to 15 seconds until flame out, we're going to spin it to hopefully give our upper stage a little bit of stabilization. We're looking on track at about 30 seconds left. We're just passing the negative 4 million meter mark. So at about 10 to 15 seconds, it'll cover the last little bit. And the Daedalus 1 should be enough to reach this payload and bring it into orbit. So let's go ahead and start our spin. At 10 seconds remaining, we got 1 million meters left to go. And our negative becomes positive, and our periapsis ends at 157 kilometers. And we are in orbit. We have successfully made it, everybody. Go ahead and separate the lower stage. We will eventually have to clear that up so it doesn't take up too much room in our tracking station, but nonetheless, we just it's not an SSTO, but definitely our launch stage to orbit, so that's pretty good. And so that leaves us with this last little bit. The SRB will be used to deorbit this once it has created enough science, and hopefully we'll be able to bring it safely through the atmosphere back home. Unfortunately, the spin stabilization that I tried to give it before separating did not work, and so now this is just kind of free floating, turning in whatever direction it kind of wants. And because there's persistent rotation in RP1, time warping won't stop its momentum in the slightest. So nothing we can do except let it float in whichever way it wants to float, and hopefully take advantage of the proper direction when we can. It's quite gorgeous. Beauty of this game with mods is just unparalleled. I've often wondered what it would look like if you were to integrate Google Maps kind of overview into RSS Reborn and see kind of almost a real life Earth. We are going to stop time warping very soon because we run out of batteries, or we are about to run out of batteries. And luckily enough for us, we are already pointed at our retrograde, so we can actually deorbit this very soon. We still have plenty of science to be done. We're going to have to launch multiples of these, or at least one more with more battery, if we want to achieve all of the science available to us from Orbital advanced biological experiments. But anyways, we fired our SRB, which brought our periapsis into a negative state, which means that we will indeed be coming back down to the surface. No doubts about it. So I separated the SRB, and that is all that I can do now. Everything else is just a matter of hopefully the probe faces the correct direction. Hopefully the heat shields last long enough. They don't explode. Hopefully the fairings don't explode. Hopefully the parachutes deploy. There's a lot of hoping going on right now, but all we can do is watch. So let's go ahead and drop into a cinematic mode because the numbers mean nothing. And the heating effect comes on in pretty strongly. But thankfully, and very fortuitously, I don't even know how we lucked out well enough, because we had no spin rotation on that, we had no kind of control. But we managed to point retrograde well enough that our heat shield is taking the full impact of the heating effect. And there was a lot of testing that was involved with this. I mean, I do say luck because of the fact that there was no spin stabilization on it. It was very lucky that we did, but there was a lot of testing and retesting and trying to find the right angle to really come through. But anyways, I talked right on through it, but we survived the heating effect, and so now we can go ahead and jettison both heat shields and the fairing to save on weight. Now that we know that we are no longer in danger of exploding via heat, just via impact. So we're going to just time warp our way and come through the clouds. We don't really need to activate our parachute until then because we are a low enough mass that it won't take very much to slow down. We are going at 4 times speed, so you can get an idea of just how slow we're going. But that's nice. We don't want to freak out our animal more than we already have. So now that I am passing through the cloud layer, I went ahead and staged my parachute. And they pop open without a problem. And remember that thing I said about we didn't want to disturb our animals? Well, hopefully they don't mind going for a little bit of a spin, because it's going to be spinning the whole way down. I am going to skip ahead a little bit because it was a long time of just spinning back and forth before we actually reach the surface. But we are about to be there, so I'm just going to kind of wrap up here. In the next episode, we're going to be focusing a lot more on the orbital program itself and try to achieve some more milestones, maybe get more science, and move farther with our program. I'm really excited to move forward into the next set of episodes because we have a heavier duty lifting rocket than we've ever had in all of our attempts, so we'll be able to do quite a bit. But anyways, that's where I'm going to leave today's episode. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you're looking forward for more RP1. If you did, please consider giving me a like, drop me a comment, let me know your thoughts, and I will see y'all in the next one. Take care.